My daughter whispered she'd leave me with nothing as her friend. The judge prepared to seize my home. She didn't realize I held a 30-year-old secret in my pocket that would send them both to prison. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The gavel strike echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, but it was the silence afterward that really cut. I sat at the defense table, feeling every year of my 71 on this earth. My back ached against the hard wood of the bench, a familiar pain from 4 decades spent in rooms exactly like this one. Across the aisle, my daughter Octavia leaned back in her chair. She didn't look like the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike. She looked like a predator. She leaned over the mahogany divider, her eyes cold as flint, and whispered loud enough only for me to hear. "I am going to leave you with nothing, Dad." The words should have broken me. They should have made me crumble right there in front of the court reporter, whose fingers were flying over the keys I used to command. Instead, I felt a strange electric steadiness. My hand went to the inside pocket of my blazer. I felt the crisp, yellowed edge of a document I'd pulled from my basement archives only 6 days ago. It was a weight, a shield, and a bomb all at once. Octavia didn't know about the basement. She didn't know that when you spend 40 years transcribing the lies of the desperate, you learn exactly how to keep a receipt. Beside her sat Derek, her husband, the man who had spent the last 3 years whispering poison into her ear until she saw her own father as an ATM with a pulse. He adjusted his silk tie, his shoes polished so bright they reflected the fluorescent lights of the Richmond County Courthouse. He caught my eye and smirked, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He thought he'd won. He thought the house I'd shared with my late wife, Martha, for 40 years was already his to flip for a profit. He didn't know I was remembering 1995. The judge, Horace Mitchell, entered with a heavy tread. I knew Horace. I'd recorded his words when he was a hungry prosecutor, and I'd watched him climb the ladder of the bench. He didn't look at me. He looked at the papers in front of him, his hands trembling just enough to make the pages rustle. Octavia had told me he was an old friend of theirs, a connection made at some glitzy charity gala. She'd warned me the trial would be quick. She'd warned me not to fight. "Mr. Hawkins," Judge Mitchell said, his voice sounding like dry parchment, "we are here to resolve the matter of the $200,000 debt claimed by the plaintiffs. Do you have counsel?" I stood up. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me how a betrayal felt. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw the stranger she'd become. "I have myself, Your Honor, and I have the truth." Derek let out a soft, mocking huff of laughter. It was a sound of absolute confidence. He thought I was just a confused old man clinging to a pile of bricks and memories. He didn't see the trap closing around him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded transcript, the paper brittle with age. "I have a question for the court before we begin," I said, my voice projecting with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose but his dignity. The air in the courtroom felt thick, like the moments before a Georgia thunderstorm. I held the transcript in my hand, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room. Octavia's lawyer, a shark named Luther Hayes, stood up, checking his gold watch. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant is attempting to delay a straightforward civil matter." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Mitchell snapped. The judge's face was the color of old ash. He looked at the document in my hand as if it were a coiled viper. "Proceed, Mr. Hawkins." 1 week earlier, my life had been quiet. I was in my kitchen, washing a single plate and a single fork. The house was a tomb of silence since Martha passed, but it was my tomb. Then the doorbell rang. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday. I opened the door to find Octavia and Derek standing there, flanked by Luther Hayes. They didn't come for coffee. They came with a folder full of promissory notes, 12 of them, totaling USD 200,000. They claimed I'd borrowed the money to fix the roof, to pay medical bills, to keep myself afloat. They showed me my own signature at the bottom of every page. It was a perfect match. Too perfect. I knew I hadn't signed those papers. I knew I'd given Octavia money for her business, not the other way around. But Derek stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter where Martha used to make pies, and told me they were taking the house to settle the debt. He told me they were being generous by not calling the police for my supposed fraud. That night, after they left, I didn't cry. I went to the basement. I spent 40 years as a court stenographer, 39 years and 8 months to be exact. I never threw anything away. Digital files vanish, but paper lasts. I went to cabinet 7, drawer 3. Muscle memory took me straight to March 15, 1995. State versus Marcus Wells. Horace Mitchell had been the prosecutor. I was the one who recorded every word. I remembered a knife, a murder weapon, that Mitchell claimed was found on a Thursday morning. But my notes, my raw shorthand from that day, showed the evidence log had it tagged on the Monday before. 3 days earlier, someone had held that knife. Someone had waited to plant it. I was young then, 28, with a new baby and a mortgage I couldn't afford to lose. I'd seen the discrepancy, and I'd stayed silent. I'd carried that guilt for 30 years, a lead weight in my soul. Back in the present, I looked at Judge Mitchell. He was the man who had sent Marcus Wells to prison for 15 years on fabricated evidence, and now he was the man presiding over the case where my daughter was trying to steal my life. Octavia, I said, turning to the witness stand, you said you met Judge Mitchell at a charity gala 3 years ago. Hayes jumped up. Objection. Relevance? Sustained, Mitchell said, his voice cracking. Mr. Hawkins, stick to the debt at hand. I ignored him. I walked toward the stand, the transcript held out like a weapon. I'm not talking about the debt, Your Honor. I'm talking about the blackmail. I'm talking about why a sitting judge would risk his career to help a real estate shark like Derek Coleman steal an old man's house. Derek's chair scraped against the floor. He was standing now, his face contorting. This is insane. He's senile. He's making up stories. I looked at Derek, then back to my daughter. I didn't borrow $2,000, let alone $200,000. But Derek knew something about the judge. He knew about 1995. He used it to force this court's hand. And you, Octavia, you just went along with it because you wanted the money. Octavia's face went pale. She looked at Derek, then at the judge. Dad, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. I unfolded the paper. This is the official transcript of the Wells trial, 1995, page 142. It shows the evidence was tampered with. And I have the phone records provided by a private investigator named Opal Sanders, showing Derek calling this court's chambers 22 times in the last month. The courtroom erupted. Mitchell slammed his gavel, but the sound was weak. He looked like a man watching his own execution. Chaos is a loud thing, but the silence that followed my accusation was louder. The bailiff moved toward me, but Mitchell held up a hand. His fingers were shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the bench. Clear the courtroom, he whispered. The gallery was ushered out, but I stayed. Octavia stayed. Derek was trying to slip out the back door, but the bailiff blocked his path. We were alone in the room that had seen 1,000 lies, but today it was going to hold the truth. You think you're so smart? Derek spat, his mask finally slipping. You're an old man in a dusty house. You think anyone cares about a 30-year-old murder trial? Marcus Wells cares, I said. He did 15 years because of what happened in this room, and I care because I'm the one who didn't speak up. I'm not making that mistake again. I turned to Octavia. She was sitting in the witness box, her hands over her mouth. She looked at Derek as if she were seeing him for the first time. The man she'd married, the man who had promised her a kingdom built on her father's ruins, was unraveling in front of her. Octavia, look at me, I commanded. My voice was the one I used when she was 6 and had broken a window. It was firm, final, the signatures on those notes. You didn't see me sign them, did you? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Derek forged them, I continued. He used your friendship with Mitchell as a cover. He told you the judge would take care of it, that it was just a legal formality to get what was ours. But it was never yours, Octavia. It was mine and your mother's. Octavia looked at Derek. Did you? She whispered. Derek didn't look at her. He was looking at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. You've got nothing, Lemuel. A yellowed piece of paper isn't evidence. It's a fairy tale. Hayes, tell him. Luther Hayes, the expensive lawyer, was already backing away. He was packing his briefcase. I am withdrawing as counsel, he said, his voice clipped. I was provided with incomplete information. He didn't even look at Octavia as he walked out of the courtroom. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the heavy, ragged breathing of Judge Mitchell. Mitchell looked down at me. "What do you want, Lemuel?" "I want you to do what you should have done in 1995, I said. "I want you to tell the truth. I want the dismissal of this case with prejudice. And then, I want you to step down." Mitchell closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the wrinkles on his face. He'd spent 30 years building a reputation on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in. Derek lunged then. He didn't go for me. He went for the transcript on the table. He wanted to tear it, to burn it, to make the past disappear one more time. The bailiff tackled him before he could reach it, slamming him against the mahogany railing. Octavia screamed, a raw, jagged sound. She scrambled out of the witness box, but she didn't go to Derek. She went to the far corner of the room, as far from him as she could get. I stood my ground, my hand resting on the paper that had cost a man 15 years of his life. "It's over, Derek," I said. "You can't destroy the truth when it's already out." Mitchell looked up, his eyes dead. "Recess," he croaked. "1 hour. Mr. Hawkins, my chambers. Now." The judge's chambers smelled of old leather and expensive bourbon. Mitchell sat behind his desk, his robe cast aside like a discarded skin. He looked smaller without it. Just a man who had made a terrible choice and spent a lifetime trying to outrun it. I stood in front of his desk. I didn't sit. I didn't want to be comfortable in this room. "You kept it," Mitchell said, gesturing to the transcript in my hand. "All these years? Why?" "Because I knew you were lying, Horace. I knew, and I was too much of a coward to say anything. I kept it to remind myself of what I'd done. I didn't know I'd need it to save my own life." Mitchell leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Derek found out." "I don't know how. He came to me 6 months ago. He had a copy of the evidence log. He told me he'd go to the GBI unless I helped him with the house. He said it was a simple civil matter, a father and a daughter. No one would notice." "I noticed," I said. Mitchell looked at me, a flicker of the old prosecutor in his eyes. "He's dangerous, Lemuel. He's not just a con man. He's a parasite. He's drained Octavia's business accounts dry. That USD 200,000, it doesn't exist. He's in debt to people who don't use courtrooms to collect. He needs your house to pay them off." The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation, and he'd used my daughter as his shield. While we were talking, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Opal Sanders. "I've found the second family," it read. "Atlanta, address attached." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Derek wasn't just a thief and a blackmailer. He was a ghost. "Horace," I said, leaning over the desk, "you're going to sign the dismissal, and then you're going to call the district attorney. If you don't, I'm walking across the street to the Chronicle. I have the records, I have the motive, and I have the man you sent to prison waiting for my call." Mitchell didn't hesitate. He pulled a sheet of letterhead from his drawer and started writing. His hand was steady now, the calmness of a man who knew the race was finally over. I walked out of the chambers and back into the hallway. Octavia was sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not yet. I had to finish this. I walked past her toward the elevators. "Where are you going?" she called out, her voice breaking. "To see what else your husband has been hiding," I said. I reached the parking lot just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the asphalt. I got into my Camry and started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a black Mercedes idling near the exit. Derek, he wasn't running, he was waiting. I pulled out of the lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I followed the GPS toward Atlanta, toward the address Opal had sent. I needed to see it for myself. I needed the final piece of the puzzle to break his hold on my daughter forever. The drive was 2 hours of white-knuckled tension. I kept checking the mirror, but the Mercedes had vanished into the sea of evening traffic. I reached a quiet, tree-lined suburb and pulled over. The house was a modest ranch, well kept, with a swing set in the backyard. I got out of the car and walked toward the front door. A woman answered. She was young, maybe 30, with a tired smile and a toddler clinging to her leg. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for Derek Coleman," I said. She smiled, a genuine warm look that made my stomach turn. "Oh, he's not home right now. He's on a business trip in Augusta." "I'm his wife, Heather. Who are you?" The world tilted. I looked at the little boy peeking from behind her skirts. He had Derek's eyes. "I'm a friend from work," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to leave him a message." I turned and walked back to my car, the woman's confused goodbye ringing in my ears. He had another life, another wife, another family. He wasn't just stealing my house. He was stealing everything from everyone he touched. I sat in the car, the darkness closing in around me. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it. "Did you like the house, old man?" Derek's voice was smooth, cold, and utterly terrifying. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "Heather's a lovely woman, isn't she?" he continued. "It would be a shame if something happened to her, or to Octavia, or to that dusty old basement of yours." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "What do you want, Derek?" "I want the transcript," he said. "And I want you to tell Mitchell to tear up that dismissal. You meet me at the old tobacco warehouse on Reynolds Street in 1 hour, alone, or I start burning things down, starting with the people you love." The warehouse on Reynolds Street was a skeletal ruin, a relic of a time when tobacco was king in Augusta. It stood at the edge of the river, surrounded by cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. I pulled my Camry into the shadow of a rusted loading dock, the engine ticking as it cooled. I was terrified. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them for a moment. I was 71 years old. I wasn't an action hero. I was a man who recorded the lives of others. But tonight, I had to be the lead in my own story. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. I'd bought it years ago to practice my speed, never thinking I'd use it for this. I clicked it on and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Then, I grabbed the 1995 transcript. It was the only leverage I had left. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of river water and rot. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. I walked toward the gaping maw of the warehouse door. "Derek," I shouted. My voice sounded thin in the vast space. "I'm here." A light flickered at the far end of the warehouse, a single naked bulb hanging from a fraying wire. Derek was standing under it. He looked different now. The polish was gone. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked like the animal he truly was. "You're late," he said. I walked toward him, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. "Where are they, Derek? Where are Octavia and Heather?" He laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "They're safe. For now. Depending on what you do next." I stopped 10 feet away from him. "I have the transcript, and I have the dismissal. Mitchell signed it. It's over." He stepped forward, the light hitting his face. He looked haggard, desperate. "It's not over until I say it is. Give me the paper." I held it up. "Why do you want it so bad, Derek? It's just words." "It's 15 years of a man's life," he spat. "And it's the only thing that keeps Mitchell under my thumb. Without that, I have nothing. I'm in debt, Lemuel. Deep debt. If I don't get that house, I'm a dead man. So you'd destroy your daughter's father? You'd destroy your other wife and your son." He flinched at the mention of the boy. "I'm doing this for them," he screamed. "If I have the money, I can make it all go away. I can start over." "You're already over," I said. "I saw the house in Atlanta. I talked to Heather. She has no idea who you are." Derek's face went white. "You went there? You went to my house?" He lunged then, his hands reaching for my throat. I tried to step back, but I tripped on a piece of fallen rebar. I hit the floor hard, the breath leaving my lungs in a painful rush. The transcript flew from my hand, sliding across the dusty concrete. Derek scrambled for it, his fingers clawing at the paper. I tried to grab his leg, but he kicked me away, a sharp pain radiating from my ribs. He stood up, clutching the yellowed pages like a trophy. "I've got it!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the rafters. "I've got it!" He pulled a lighter from his pocket and flicked it. The flame danced in the darkness, a tiny flickering point of destruction. He held the edge of the transcript to the fire. I watched, helpless, as the first corner began to curl and blacken. 30 years of guilt, 15 years of a man's stolen life, all turning to ash in the hands of a monster. But then, a shadow moved in the darkness behind him. Derek didn't see it. He was too busy watching the past burn. "Put it down, Derek." The voice was rough, low, and filled with a cold, quiet fury. Derek spun around, the burning paper still in his hand. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, thin, with skin like weathered leather and eyes that had seen the inside of a cage for too long. Marcus Wells. Derek stared at him, the lighter falling from his hand. The transcript was still smoldering, but the flame had died out. "Who the hell are you?" "The man I sent to prison," I whispered, struggling to sit up. Marcus didn't look at me. He looked at Derek. He looked at the man who had used his suffering as a bargaining chip. "I've been following you for 3 days, Derek," Marcus said. "I saw you at the courthouse. I saw you at the hotel. And I saw you threaten this man." He stepped into the light. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. He was a man who had already lost everything, and that made him the most dangerous person in the room. "Give him the paper," Marcus said. Derek backed away, his eyes darting around the warehouse. "Get back. I'll call the cops." Marcus laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "I spent 15 years with the cops, Derek." "I'm not afraid of them anymore. Are you?" He moved with a surprising grace, closing the gap before Derek could react. He grabbed Derek's wrist and twisted, the transcript falling to the floor once more. Derek let out a yelp of pain and tried to punch Marcus, but the older man simply sidestepped and shoved him. Derek hit a wooden support pillar and slumped to the ground, the fight suddenly drained out of him. He looked at us, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming realization of his own defeat. I crawled toward the transcript and picked it up. It was scorched, the edges black and brittle, but the words were still there. The truth was still there. Marcus looked down at Derek. "You're lucky," he said. "If I were the man they said I was in 1995, you wouldn't be breathing right now." He turned to me and held out a hand. He helped me to my feet, his grip like iron. "Are you okay, Mr. Hawkins?" "I'm fine," I said, leaning against him. "Thank you, Marcus. I'm so sorry. For everything." Marcus looked at the scorched paper in my hand. "Don't be sorry," he said. "Just make it right." We walked out of the warehouse, leaving Derek huddled in the dirt. The police were waiting outside, their sirens silent but their lights painting the old bricks in red and blue. Dez had called them. He'd known I wouldn't be able to stay away. As they led Derek away in handcuffs, I saw Octavia standing by the police cars. She looked at her husband, then at me. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I walked over to her and handed her the voice recorder from my pocket. "It's all on here," I said. "Every confession, every lie." She took it, her hands trembling. "Dad, I held up a hand. "Not now, Octavia. I'm tired. I just want to go home." I got into my car and drove away, the lights of the city blurring in my vision. I had my house. I had the truth. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw the empty porch where Martha used to sit, I realized that some things could never be fully repaired. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the scorched transcript, the final piece of a 30-year-old puzzle. My phone rang. It was Octavia. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to forgive. I sat in the silence of my home, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I'd won. But the cost was a hole in my life that no amount of justice could ever fill. Then, the doorbell rang. The chime of the doorbell at 2 in the morning felt like a physical strike against the silence of my kitchen. I stood frozen, the scorched 1995 transcript still resting on the table like a dead thing. My mind raced to the warning Heather Morrison had given me, that Derek was cornered and dangerous. I moved to the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and looked through the peephole. It wasn't Derek, it was Octavia. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had sat in that courtroom smirking at me. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a tangled nest, and her eyes were raw from crying. When I opened the door, she didn't say a word. She just collapsed into the wooden chair in the entryway, her body shaking with silent sobs. I didn't reach out to comfort her. I walked to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee, my face set in a hard mask of granite. "Dad, I didn't know," she finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear to God I didn't know about any of it." I set a mug down in front of her with a sharp clack. "You didn't want to know, Octavia," I said, my voice flat and cold. "There is a massive difference between being blind and closing your eyes." She told me everything then, the words spilling out in a desperate flood. Derek had vanished after the warehouse confrontation, but not before emptying every single account they owned. He had taken $320,000, the business payroll, their personal savings, the money I had given her years ago. Everything was gone. He was calling her clients, telling them she was mentally unstable, that she was a criminal, systematically burning her reputation to the ground out of pure vindictiveness. "Come downstairs," I said. I led her into my basement, into the war room I had built in the shadows. I turned on the overhead light, revealing the corkboard covered in red string, photos, and documents. I showed her the timeline I had constructed, the 1995 Wells case, Mitchell's rise to power, the 2018 fraud Derek had committed, and the choreographed meeting at the charity gala in 2022. I showed her the photos of the house in Atlanta and the records of the other wife, Heather. Octavia stared at the wall for a long time, her face losing what little color it had left. "He played me from the very beginning," she whispered, her hand trembling as she traced a line of red string. "Yes, he did," I said. "But Derek isn't the only one who committed a crime here, Octavia. You sat on that stand and you committed perjury. You swore those promissory notes were real. You testified under oath that my signatures were authentic. That's a felony, and the district attorney is going to be looking for someone to blame for the Mitchell scandal." She looked at me, terror finally replacing the grief in her eyes. "What do I do, Dad?" I leaned over the table, my shadow stretching long across the basement floor. "You tell the truth," I said. "Every single word of it. You go to the press before Derek can spin another lie. You burn your own life down to save what's left of your soul." The phone rang on the workbench, the sound startling us both. I picked it up and hit the speaker. It was Heather Morrison. Her voice was tight with panic. "Mr. Hawkins," Derek called me, she said. "He's at the Grand Hotel downtown. He's got the cash, and he's trying to get me to take the kids and flee the country with him." Octavia's face hardened into a mask of pure rage. "I'll help you destroy him," she said to the empty room. The Augusta Chronicle building was a fortress of glass and steel in the early morning light. By 8:15, I was standing in the editorial office with Octavia, Marcus Wells, and my old friend Des. We didn't just bring stories, we brought the receipts. We laid out the unedited recordings from my pocket device, the property deeds Derek had stolen from the Wells family, and the financial trail of the blackmail. The editor, Susan Torres, looked at the evidence and then at Octavia. "This is the biggest scandal in the history of this city," she said, her voice filled with a grim sort of excitement. While Derek was holding a staged press conference on the courthouse steps, trying to claim I was an abusive father, the Chronicle hit the internet with a thunderclap. The headline was a jagged blade: bigamy, blackmail, and betrayal. By noon, the world knew that Derek Coleman had 2 wives and had used a 30-year-old murder trial to choke a sitting judge into submission. Derek was trapped in his room at the Grand Hotel as the news broke. His credit cards were declined because the bank had frozen every account for a fraud investigation. Reporters were swarming the lobby like sharks in a feeding frenzy. He was a man with $300,000 in stolen cash and nowhere left to run. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the city council chambers on a Tuesday night. The room was packed to the rafters with cameras and angry citizens. Judge Horace Mitchell was there, looking like a man who had already died and simply forgotten to fall over. Marcus Wells stood at the podium first. He didn't yell. He spoke with the quiet, devastating authority of a man who had spent 15 years in a cage for a crime he didn't commit. He held up the 1995 transcript, the very one I had saved, and pointed at Mitchell. "You put me there with your lies, Judge," Wells said, the room so silent you could hear the hum of the television cameras. I was called next. I projected the timeline onto the big screen, showing every connection, every forged signature, and every threatening text Derek had sent. When I finished, the council president turned to Mitchell and asked if he disputed any of it. The judge looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "No, I don't dispute it," he whispered. "It's all true." Two police officers stepped forward and handcuffed the judge in front of the entire city. As they led him away, he passed Marcus Wells. 15 years, Judge, Wells said quietly. "Remember that number." Octavia was the last to speak. She walked to the podium and admitted to the entire world that she had been a fool. She admitted she had believed a monster over her own father. She looked at me from across the room, her face wet with tears. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. I nodded once, my eyes softening just a fraction, but I didn't smile. Justice had arrived, but it had come with a heavy bill. 3 months passed before the dust truly settled in Augusta. The summer heat was thick and heavy, the kind of humidity that makes you feel like you're breathing underwater. Mitchell was in a cell awaiting trial, and Derek was facing 8 felonies that would likely keep him behind bars until he was an old man himself. Octavia had lost everything. Her boutique was gone, her marriage was a criminal record, and she was working a retail job at Macy's just to keep food on the table. She lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, a far cry from the life Derek had promised her. I was sitting on my back porch in July watching the fireflies dance in the tall grass when my phone buzzed. It was Octavia. "Dad, can I come over?" she asked. She arrived 20 minutes later, wearing simple jeans and a plain shirt, her designer life stripped away. We sat at the kitchen table, and I made a pot of coffee, just like I always did. She pushed a manila envelope across the table toward me. "This is $4,000, she said. "It's every cent I've saved from working and selling whatever I had left. I know it doesn't cover what I cost you, but it's a start." I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Octavia, do you actually understand what you did wrong?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine without flinching for the first time in years. "I trusted money over family," she said. "I let my own greed make me vulnerable, and I chose a stranger's lies over the man who raised me." I pushed the envelope back to her. "Keep it," I said. "You're going to need it to rebuild." "I can't forgive you completely, Octavia," I continued, my voice steady. "Some things stay broken even after they're fixed, but I can give you a chance to earn back my trust. Sunday dinners starting next week. We talk, we're honest, and we see what happens." She started to cry again, but this time, they weren't the tears of a victim. They were the tears of a daughter who had finally found her way home. The next morning, I received a letter from Marcus Wells. The state had finally settled his civil suit for wrongful imprisonment, $2.1 million. Inside the envelope was a check made out to me for $200,000. "You earned this," the note read. "Without you, I'd still be a ghost in a cell." I sat with that check for 2 days, staring at the numbers. Then I sat down and wrote my own check for the exact same amount. I put it in an envelope and mailed it to Octavia with a short note. "Consider this an investment in a future built on the truth. It's a gift from Marcus Wells. Don't waste it." The final Sunday of July was the first time both of my daughters had been under my roof at the same time in 5 years. Marlene had flown in from Toronto, and the tension in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. I made them sit down and face each other. "You lost your mother," I said to them both. "You almost lost me. Life is too short to spend it hating your own blood." We ate my pot roast. It was mediocre as always, but nobody complained. We talked about Mom. We looked through old photo albums, seeing the ghosts of the happy family we used to be. It was awkward and painful, but for the first time, it was honest. Octavia had received the check. She tried to thank me, but I stopped her. "It's not from me," I reminded her. "It's from a man who lost 15 years so that you could learn what justice looks like. Use it to start over, but do it slowly this time. After they left, I walked out onto the back porch and sat in my favorite chair. The Georgia sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. I had my house. I had my daughters. Marcus Wells had his life back, and the men who had tried to ruin us were rotting in a cage. I reached into my pocket and felt the edges of the 1995 transcript one last time. It was scorched and brittle, a relic of a sin I had finally atoned for. I walked to the small fire pit in the yard, struck a match, and watched the paper curl into white ash. I had spent my life recording the words of others, the triumphs and the tragedies of strangers. But as I watched the smoke rise into the summer night, I realized I had finally written the only story that truly mattered. The house was quiet, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. I took a sip of my iced tea and closed my eyes, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of the river. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a fair one. And in this world, sometimes fair is exactly what you need. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.